Welcome to the Tamriel Vault fan feature. We are Character Crusade. I'm Stu.
And I'm Joe.
And I'm Matt.
And in this episode, we are talking about the Shadow Scale character build.
Cool. Let's talk about the Shadow Scale a little bit.
Let's do that. So the Shadow Scale is essentially a character build developed in cooperation between Emmer Dariloth and No Snakes Alive on the TamrielVault.com. This build is all about kind of the Argonian assassin, the raised from birth to be an assassin Argonian Shadow Scale. Oh, cool. The character build page for the Shadow Scale on Tamriel Vault contains a lot of interesting information, some of which is kind of narrative background that gives you a little bit of history around the Shadow Scale and tells you a little bit about how they were raised, has an example of an actual character that might be a Shadow Scale. But I think what's most intriguing about this particular build is the sort of really unique fighting style that this build portrays. I mean, it's an extremely challenging character to play as this build lays it out, but I can see how it would be also very, very rewarding. So this is a legendary rank character build.
All right.
On the Tamriel Vault, and features primarily, I think, the Argonian because of its ties to lore.
Right,
and so
that makes
forth.
sense.
Yep.
All right, so tell us a little bit about just some of the vital stats on it.
Okay, so obviously Argonian. The recommendation here by the creators is that for major skills, you focus on sneak, pickpocket, block, illusion, and one-handed. And then we have a smaller collection of suggested minor skills in alteration, heavy armor, and smithing. Now, the really interesting thing comes when you actually look at the recommended gear, because the recommended gear is actually robes, perhaps ebony boots, gloves, and a shield.
Okay.
Which doesn't actually say assassin when you look at it on the page, right?
No.
Yeah, we all think about kind of the dagger wielding, throat slitting,
right.
Kind of assassin. But I think what makes this build most interesting is the combination of equipment, but more importantly, the way in which this selection of gear is utilized to perform assassinations in combination with spell abilities, shouts, and all kinds of stealth thieving abilities.
So go over the equipment one more time, just in brief as you did.
Yeah, the recommended gear is hooded black robes,
Okay.
plus ebony boots, ebony gloves, and a shield of some type.
Now, I wonder if would those all be light armor except for the robes?
No, actually,
'Cause
the ebony boots and gloves are heavy armor, right?
Well, that's a really unique combination.
Combined with gloves. The real kicker is when you see the recommendation for weapon choice, which says your enemies. So the whole purpose of this build, the whole thrust of this build, is that you use your stealth and spell capabilities to basically relieve your enemies of their weapons and kill them with their own weapons.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a challenge.
That's brutal.
Exactly. So I'm thinking that in order for us to really kind of understand how this is supposed to work, we might talk about a couple of examples. So obviously the challenge here is the authors aren't suggesting that the Shadow Scale would not have any weapons, but what they're recommending is that you kind of stick with a dagger as the only weapon that you carry on you.
Right, okay.
And then the objective is to use some of your other capabilities to really relieve your enemies of their weapons. And this can be done in a number of different ways.
Sure.
You can actually pickpocket them and take their weapons.
Yep.
Or you can use something like a disarm shout. Force them to drop their weapon and then do some kind of a grab for their weapon with either just a quick move to the weapon or kind of a stealth roll to the weapon,
Sure.
which can get you there faster.
Right.
So this build is a challenge in that there are some equipment restrictions here, But it also, I think, is going to require a certain amount of dexterity and situational awareness to be able to not only disarm an opponent, but locate that weapon and grab it quickly. Now, one other option they suggest here, too, is the use of telekinesis to actually pull the weapon to you.
Oh, yeah. That was kind of my first thought.
Exactly. So, yeah, I think that there's a number of interesting things that could be done with this. Now, if you look at the character build page, they have kind of a recommended perk spread. So how
Sure.
you should spend your perk points by level 60 to really
Right.
kind of capitalize on this build. And, you know, one of the interesting things is that at higher levels, you could actually go to more a heavier armor or light armor or something like that.
Sure.
But the intent, I think, is that, you know, when faced with a lot of opponents, that's when the shield comes out, and you use that for defensive purposes to buy time to figure out what your next move is.
Sure.
And I think one of the things that's kind of refreshing about this build is they don't shy away at all from the idea that you flee combat if combat doesn't make sense for you.
Right.
And
Okay.
one of the things that makes this one particularly good for Argonians is that, you know, fleeing to water is considered
Right.
a really excellent way to
Well,
escape.
yeah, because you can deep dive and
Yeah, I mean,
not worry.
exactly. Argonians can go under as long as they need to escape.
Right.
And so they have a really cool special moves section for the shadow scale, and I'm going to go through a couple of these here. One is kind of this idea of playing mind games with your opponents, and so they recommend doing things like using a combination of the shout, become ethereal, and hysteria or mayhem spells, right? Where you are essentially inciting a riot, you know, causing a huge riot where people might attack themselves, but using something like the become ethereal shout to keep yourself from being injured.
Right.
Or using a combination of the whirlwind sprint shout with Argonian water breathing. So you're going to use whirlwind sprint to get yourself to the,
To the
water,
water.
as quickly as possible.
dive,
Right.
dive.
Yeah, and escape all these people who are coming after you.
So really, there's no dishonor in staying alive.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And then interesting use of things like pacify, misdirection, and backstab, stuff like that. This is really, I think, a build for people who are interested in not only something unique, but something that's really focused on well thought out tactical combat. So this is the kind of build where just the very fact that you're not wearing armor forces you to think very carefully about every single altercation you consider getting yourself into.
Well-
all of your approach paths, all of your exit
Yes.
opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah, and the
Absolutely.
armor you do wear is going to have an impact on your sneaking and your stealth
Exactly.
because you're wearing big, heavy boots.
Exactly. And they actually make an interesting recommendation in here, too, that rather than fleeing from combat, one possible option is to also relieve your opponents of their armor
Okay.
through pickpocket, right?
Oh,
Garb yourself in heavy armor,
You've got to be really good to take somebody's armor off.
right? Well, yeah, but it is possible in game. It's a mechanic we can
Right.
use, right? So having absconded with someone's heavy armor, decking yourself out in heavy armor, stealing their weapons, and then standing in the middle of combat and fighting them toe to toe that way.
Right.
With
Right.
their weapon.
With their weapons and their armor, obviously the objective is to kill the target, not to keep the equipment.
Right.
So when the things are over, you discard the equipment. The idea is you melt back into the crowd, right? And you're a member of the populace wearing normal clothing,
Yeah.
looking your victims in the eye and having them not realize who they're looking at, their own killer, right?
That's pretty cool.
So there is just an absolute ton of role play potential in this, and I think some opportunities to replay certain altercations in the game over and over, trying to see how efficiently you can do these
oh
things.
yeah.
So,
Come up with new ideas and set little goals for yourself. Kind of
Absolutely.
a personal best, so to speak.
absolutely. So yeah, this one is a lot of fun, and I'm very tempted to give this one a shot myself.
This is really cool. What kind of mods do you think we could wrap with this?
I've been thinking about that, and I think the important thing is to make sure that we're being true to the build.
Right.
So I've been thinking about primarily some spells that might enhance this, maybe even make some of the combat feel a bit more cinematic or give a wider array of options without
Right.
straying from the spirit of the concept.
Right.
One of the things that immediately comes to mind to me is Apocalypse spell package, specifically for two spells, one of which is Ghost Walk and the other is Swap. These are spells that I've used in my own playthroughs. And Ghost Walk is one of these where it allows you to become invisible for several seconds. But when the invisibility wears off, you're teleported back to the spot where you cast the spell.
Right.
That could be kind of an interesting feature for doing some of these pickpocket things, right?
Oh, sure.
Where you can cast the spell, go invisible, go around a corner, pickpocket somebody, and the act of picking their pocket
Will trigger
dispels the spell and takes you back to where you were, where you can equip the item, right?
Right.
So that to me is kind of an interesting idea. The other one that I really like is Swap, and what Swap does is it's a ranged spell that you can cast on an opponent or anyone for that matter, and it basically allows you to trade places with them.
Oh.
So it would be possible, for example, to use something like Disarm, the Disarm Shout, and then use that spell to trade places with an individual to get closer to where the weapon dropped, for example.
Oh, sure.
The other thing that I absolutely love about Swap and its assassination potential is you cast, there is a period of time, just several seconds after the spell hits your opponent, when you have an opportunity to act. It's very short, it's like 2 seconds, but in the right opportunity, it can be extremely deadly in the right scenario. So what you do is with a shadow scale like this, you can cast the spell on an opponent, and as it hits the opponent and you see the spell begin to take effect, you jump off the top of a cliff. You jump off a cliff, right? And suddenly you switch, and now your opponent
they're
falls
falling.
to their death, and you're standing wherever they were, watching them
Wham.
plummet, right?
Nice.
It's a beautiful, sort of poetic way to
If
do
you
it.
get the timing right.
Yes, if you get the timing right, it's a great kind of assassination, right? Because it looks like the guy just fell off a cliff, right? You know, just made a
Right.
mistake,
Oops.
fell off a cliff, and suddenly it was all over. So that's a couple things I
Cliff,
can think of.
tower, anything high.
Yeah. But honestly, the sky's the limit with this build. So many cool things going on with this, and really fairly complex, but extremely interesting. The structure of the build itself is what is going to force you into interesting roleplay situations.
Awesome.
So that's what I love about this. If you are interested in getting more information about this great Tamriel Vault build, visit tamrielvault.com. We're Character Crusade, and we'll see you next time.